green today, actually.
Facebook's not playing ball, bear with me.
Okay. Well, it's a bit technical that you can do all your Facebook and live streaming. It's
Yeah,
good stuff.
It's clever. And for our non-clinical staff, it's and our clinical staff, it's really important so they don't get, they can catch up at their leisure. So it's good.
You're starting off with this, aren't you, Tracy?
I will. So I'll do a brief introduction. Yeah.
Right, nearly there this time, bear with me.
And I'm going to kind of go through some of the definitions of what racism is and then talk a little bit about how we can deal with something about it.
Yeah. Oh, lovely. I think we've got David Werrett, our Director of Workforce.
Oh, he's going to be watching me.
He's watching, yeah.
Him and the whole world. Just join the queue, David.
Right, we're now live on Facebook and ready to go. Thank you, Tracy and Joy.
Wonderful. Thank you very much, Judith. And thank you very much to all of our CUH staff and colleagues that are joining us today. So you've joined us for another Black History Month presentation. And today I'm delighted to bring Joy Warmington here today to do this presentation on wellness in a challenging work environment. So this presentation today is part of a whole series of presentations that the Reach Network is bringing to our CUH workforce as part of celebrating Black History Month. And given that one of the key themes of Black History Month this year is Black health and wellness, I'm absolutely delighted that Joy has managed to carve out some time from her amazingly hectic schedule to take us through her understanding of this area where she's a leader and give us some supporting tips and guidance. But before I actually give Joy the platform, I'd just like to share a few key elements and highlights from her background because she's just an amazing person and has done some wonderful achievements. So Joy is CEO of BRAP, which is an equalities and human rights charity. BRAP the focus on BRAP is to transform organizational thinking and practice on equality. Joy has designed and led delivery on the White Allyship Programme in partnership with the King's Fund. In addition to that, she's also a qualified psychotherapist and a visiting professor at the University of Middlesex. And I could go on and on. Joy has also done some key foundational pieces of work with other academic leads like Roger Klein, which have contributed to NHS strategy on race equality. And without any further ado, Joy, I'll hand you the platform. You're very, very welcome. And thank you for joining us today.
Thank you, Tracy. It's always very embarrassing hearing things about yourself, but I have to tell you one thing though, I am a trainee psychotherapist, so I haven't quite got there yet. So I'm not quite licensed to practice, but I have been working towards becoming a psychotherapist. So I wanted to thank you for the opportunity to talk to your staff directly in Black History Month. I think it's a really challenging subject. I think whenever October comes around, I'm always filled with a bit of anticipation because I'm thinking there'll be some really interesting things going on over the course of this month. But then I also wonder what happens to us the other 11 months of the year. So I'm really pleased that you've invited me to speak specifically about wellness. And I'm going to be sharing a few slides, which I hope will be useful context for this presentation. I suppose the other thing that I was going to talk specifically about is I was going to talk about the R word. I was going to talk about racism and experience of racism, because actually, as much as October is an opportunity to really celebrate and to really think more critically about the wider contribution of Black, Asian and minority ethnic staff. I also think it's an opportunity sometimes for us to think more deeply about the way that society and the world has impacted upon us. And I really want to be talking a little bit about, well, what do we really do about these experiences of racism as part of our opportunity to think about managing our own wellness. So that's really what the focus of my presentation is going to be today. So I just wanted to give people a trigger warning that I will be talking a little bit about racism before I move into talking about how we can keep ourselves a little bit well through those experiences. So I'm going to share my screen. Hopefully this will work. I hope you can see that. Yes, you probably can. So you've already spoken about our organization. We're a charity. We're 23 years old, and we're really about trying to raise the aspirations in terms of the way we think about and practice equality. So that's really what makes us a little bit different or distinct from other organizations doing this work in the field. So I was going to start off by talking a little bit about your experiences, and I didn't quite appreciate that this was going to be a webinar, so I thought I'd get some people to look at some people. So I was going to kind of start off by saying, hands up if you've experienced racism in either your life or your work, and I would imagine that most people would have been able to have stuck their hands up and said yes. You know, even if you were unclear about whether or not it was racism, you might have experienced a bit of bias, you might have come across an experience where you felt that you were treated perhaps a little bit differently from those of the people around you. So there's a range of experiences that we have when we are racialized as either Black or brown people. And those experiences are challenging as we navigate not only our work life, but our world life as well. And one of the things I like Audre Lorde, she's one of my favorite people. When we talk about wellness and caring for ourselves, one of the things we can get into as people who experience racism is a bit of survival mode. So we kind of suck it up, you know, this has happened again, you know, I've just been into this shop, I've just been followed, or, you know, I've just been pulled over by the police, or something else has happened. And we tend to not recognize that that is actually a bit of a moment where we've been treated in ways that are not in keeping with what our society would say it would want for us. And that kind of, the way that we gloss over that has an impact. And I'll talk a little bit more about those impacts later on. But the reason why I put this quote up by Audre Lorde is because one of the things that she says is that caring for myself is not self-indulgence, it is self-preservation. And that is an act of political warfare. And she didn't mean it in the sense that we would kind of go to arms, but actually, if we're going to be able to challenge racism, to stand up against racism, to work for equity, then we need to have some resources to do that. We need to be able to recognize that noticing things that happen to us and being prepared to care for ourselves is not about being indulgent. It's actually about preserving ourselves and self-preservation. And I suppose, like many people on this call or watching this video, I can imagine if you've been second or third generation immigrant to this country, your parents worked really hard. So I never saw my mom kind of sit down and have a rest or, you know, take a day off. It was always something that she was doing and something that my father was doing. And I think that this idea of wellness is not one that we find easy to pick up. You know, we always feel that we should be doing something. So I'm inviting you to just dip into this idea that it's really important to care for yourself. I wanted to pick up on this idea around what happens to us when we have an experience that is one of racism or discrimination. And we go into a bit of a cycle. And we do that, I call it 3D. So we go into a bit of denial. Did that really happen to me? Did I really notice that that didn't really happen to me? I'm sure they meant something else by it. I'm sure that this, this wasn't meant the way it came across. And that cycle of denial, I certainly go through it. When something happens to me, I kind of process it and I kind of think, oh, I'm sure this was never intended the way that it happened. And then we go into a bit of deflection, where we kind of try to distance ourselves from what happens to give a bit of an explanation around that. But deflection also happens to us. So sometimes when we raise an issue, people kind of go, are you sure that was really what happened? Are you sure that was what was meant? They're a bit funny, they're a bit like that with anybody, with everyone. So it becomes, we second guess ourselves whether we've really had an experience that may be discriminatory all the time. And then we get into distraction, which is about, what about all of these other isms? What about X? What about Y? And it becomes very hard to hold on to the fact that there is something here that needs to be dealt with. And if you can imagine that as a cycle, that whirls around all the time. Not only does it whirl around in us, should I raise this? Can I afford to raise it? What about time? What about circumstances? But it kind of whirls around in our society as well. So those two kind of circles are spinning around simultaneously. And when we think about what racism is, and I'm positive that you would have seen these definitions before, we're not really talking about something that is made up. We're talking about a created state of belief that was created for a particular purpose back in the 16th century. So this isn't something that we've just arrived at. This is something that, if we look back in our history, we can see the points where suddenly people of color began to be categorized negatively. That at one point they were just different types of people, but soon after, when it becomes clear that our labor and our goods can be exploited, different things start to happen to us. So we begin to see the categorization of skin color based on features and hair, and how those categorizations are combined with different values of worth. So it's not the categorization in and of itself, it's what it signifies and what it continues to signify within our society. So we still have a legacy of prejudice thinking. We still have a way that we work that ranks and rates people, which is not made up, but is very much part of the systemic, what we call systemic belief systems within our society, which is why our society looks the way it does. It's why we might find it more challenging to get higher roles. It's why we, when you look at the organization and how it's patterned and where people sit, a lot of this is to do with prejudice behavior and thinking in action. And what that has led to is a bit of a challenge in terms of how we see racism in our society. So racism has gone underground. So there was a time when I was growing up, for example, I know I look much younger than I really am, but I was growing up where people would be very open about racist language. It would be on the television. it would be in my school. People used to, use the N words and the P words all over the place. And what you could then do is you could spot racist language. You could spot racism because of language, because of jokes. You kind of saw those things happening right at the top of our society. And for most of us, when we see that overt and socially unacceptable racism, we jump on it. We kind of go, you can't do this. You're not supposed to be doing that. We're gonna have to educate you. We're gonna have to take you through a process. So the overt and socially unacceptable racism is much easier for us to spot, but we've got kind of good at recognizing that we shouldn't do those things. So what I think has happened, and what we're now seeing, is that racism has actually gone underground. So what's below the line are what I would call socially accepted racism. So we still talk about being followed around shops, for example. We don't know, we know it's not right, we know it happens, but it appears to be accepted. We still question Black people's experiences of racism. Are you sure about this? So we go through the denial, the diminishing cycle again. We often blame people who've experienced racism. Or they're a bit odd, they're a bit awkward, they're a bit loud, they're a bit aggressive. We prioritize the voices and experiences of white people. So sometimes the only way racism is permitted is if a white person says it's racism, it's kind of weird, actually. We have to go through a process where somebody white usually then says, oh, this looks like it was racism. So actually our experiences are often diminished and taken off the table. There's greater levels of surveillance. So when I look sometimes and I work with organizations on disciplinary issues, what I find when I dig into those issues a little bit more is that sometimes it's not that people weren't doing things that they shouldn't have been doing. It's just that actually it's who do you notice that's doing those things. So there's issues of greater surveillance for some people where other people don't have that level of scrutiny. So, there's a whole load of things here: tokenism, fearing people of color, cultural appropriation, denial of history, the fact that we don't have a full representation of history, and we're in 2022, that we believe very much that if you didn't succeed, it was your own fault, that when we don't recognize that people have different starting positions. So there's a whole load of things here that are still socially acceptable that I could have added a lot more. And these are the things that we often define as microaggressions. These are the things that sort of happen to Black and Asian and minority ethnic people on a daily basis, not only in wider society, but in many of the organizations that we work in. And this leads to it depends on who you read. You could talk about, you could read Resme McKinnon has done it, but lots of other organizations and writers have talked a little bit more about this idea of racialized trauma. So this is the mental, emotional injury when somebody says to you, it wasn't racism, you were just having a bad day. You just, that's the way they are. And when you experience this on a macro scale, so it happens in our wider society, but it also gets experienced on a micro scale through those microaggressions, through those little behaviors where you're left out, or you're not spoken to, or you're in a meeting and you've got your hand up and nobody recognizes that you've had your hand up. So what we talk about is that impact, which is not only happening in the here and now, but it's intergenerational. I know my father used to talk a lot about his experiences. He was He used to work on the buses. He was a bus driver. He used to talk about how other bus drivers spoke to him and treated him. And I was hearing all of that as I was growing up. So there's a trauma that goes on through the experiences that we might have had through our parents and our grandparents. And this can be very much passed down through generations. And if you've read My Grandmother's Hand by Resmaa Menakem, he talks a lot about that. And then there's something that happens to us in terms of how are we left with a lot of this? So what do we do with those feelings of inadequacy, feelings of being dismissed, feelings of being misunderstood and not heard? And it can lead to internalized oppression or trauma. So this is a busy slide, and I'm not intending to talk all the way through it. But I think there's something we do when we experience or have an experience of racism, which is something very personal to us. And what I would be inviting people to think about when they have an experience of racism is the bottom end, actually, of this thing, that actually there's a acceptance of this, which is really important, because actually if you don't accept that these things are happening, not only are you leaning into systemic racism that wants to pretend that everything's okay and that, you know, life is wonderful anyway, but you're also denying your own beliefs, and you're kind of making yourself out to be a little bit of a, it's kind of like, is this all in my head? This is all about me. And that's not a good place to be. So when you get into denial, sometimes you experience shock because people are telling you you're making too much out of your experiences. You can also become very numb, and you can distance yourself from the racism that you might have experienced or seen. And I think it can be a bit of a pause button, denial. It can help you to distance yourself from your experience until you're ready to really understand and process it. One of the things I think that's really hard for people of colour is anger, because things that happen to us sometimes deserve anger. They deserve that emotion. But often when we're getting angry, we get labelled for the anger that we experience. And that's really hard, because we can't often express that something happened to us that was wrong. And that's a kind of really frustrated place to be. And you might shut off and not really want to think about it. But anger can help you to recognize a boundary, something that's definitely not okay. And in the moments that we experience anger, I'm inviting you to think about how those tell us that this isn't okay, that in your anger, you're learning to resist racism, you're learning not to accept it. So with each of these stages, what I'm suggesting is that there are ways in which we respond to a racist incident, and it's really important for our own wellness that we begin to notice those stages and what these stages actually do to us and how we actually support ourselves. So when we go through a depression stage, when you feel this is really hopeless, I'm never ever going to get out of this situation. Every time I feel I can be hopeful about the fact that racism isn't going to exist in my life, something happens and it's going to last forever. It's really important to connect with people who are on this journey and to really kind of understand the need for support and the need to be able to recognize that other people are also in this experience. And then there's an acceptance stage where you can go beyond acceptance, and really that's the point at which it can be quite cooling for us to recognize that, you know, this goes on but we can still survive. But you actually need to notice that these stages are not linear, We can go backward and forward. So 1 minute we can be accepting that this has happened to us, and the next minute we can be angry about it. And all of this stuff is really, really, really possible. The bit that I wanted to focus on then is what can really sustain us through the stages. So we're talking about wellness here. We're talking about the importance to focus on how we can support ourselves and others. And one of the things that really helps me is to recognize that this is something about the system, that the system is reproducing racism in the same ways it's reproducing sexism, it's producing ableism, it's producing heterosexism, it's producing all of those norms, those normative things. And because it's set up to produce that, I don't have to feel individually responsible for fixing it. Yeah, it's not my fix, it's not my burden. This is something much bigger than me. And sometimes that gives me a little bit of, it gives me an opportunity to just take my foot off the pedal, and I can go, okay, right, I know what's going on here. This is systemic. I think the other thing is that we should recognize and acknowledge patterns of abuse. So part of what systemic racism does is it tells you to suck it up. You're a black or you're a brown person in this society, you're going to experience racism, just get over it, get resilient. I don't want to tell my children they should be resilient about things that are abusive. We don't tell any other children that when something abusive happens to you, you should be resilient, you should suck it up. So I think it's important that we make it a big deal, that actually that we should be upset, that we should be with others, and that we give people permission to grieve and to feel. One of my most poignant moments over the pandemic was when we had a Black workers session at a trust I was at previously, and there was about 60 people on the call, and we were just noticing the impact of the pandemic on people who of color, and we just held each other in silence, because actually this is really this is real stuff. These are real people that have died and been impacted on. And these were, the greater proportion of those people were people of color. So I think we need to give ourselves permission to recognize that this is upsetting, that this is real, that we're human in here, that we're not just blobs of people and we can just have this stuff happen to us over and over and over again. The other thing I think is important, and this goes back to my Audre Lorde quote, is rest. We don't often rest. We're often the people working 2 jobs or 3 jobs, or trying to work against the system. So it's a heavy journey, and it's hard to traverse this journey in a brown or black body. It's not an easy journey. So it's a marathon, not a race. So it's okay to set limits. It's okay to engage and not to engage. It's not every day that I say I'm going to tackle racism. Sometimes something happens and I just have to let it go. Not because I don't think it's important, but because, as Audre Lorde says, actually I have to preserve myself sometimes. I have to recognize that the battle will still be there tomorrow. It'll still be there the day after. So it's not everything that I have to jump on all the time. Collectivism, being with others. That's one of the most important things for me. I couldn't do this work if I didn't work in an organization where people get me, they get racism, where we can come in, tear our hair out, where something happens, and we can kind of go, wasn't that an awful thing? Because we're not just dealing with racism, we're dealing with sexism, we're dealing with issues to do with sexuality and gender. So we get lots of this stuff happening, and being with somebody and people who care is really important. And one of the things that systemic racism likes to do, likes to make you feel alone. It likes you to believe that you're the only one suffering, you're the only one going through this, because it's all about you and it's not about the system. So make sure you have your support mechanisms, and don't become polarized. Guard against using your humanity. Sometimes we try so hard not to feel that we actually we become a bit monolithic and very stoic. You know, our emotions aren't clear anymore, because we're kind of guarding ourselves against the kind of pushback or the thing that we're going to actually experience. And that means that we lose something of ourselves. And I kind of talk a lot about practicing being holy. I don't mean that in the Christian sense. What I mean is that there's sometimes it's important to let things go through you, to don't let it lodge within you, to let it go the other way, so it can go straight through you, because it's not yours. And if you keep it, it eats away at you. So I practice quite a lot, just letting some of these things that happen to me just go through me, because they don't belong to me. And I want to be as human as possible. I don't want to be caught up in all of these things that don't really belong to me or mine. So I hope I haven't talked too much. I hope that potentially gives some opportunities for you to hang some strategies on. I'm sure there'll be lots of other things that you do. I was reading something the other day about stress, and one of the things it talked about was dancing. And I thought to myself, ooh, well, actually, I do a lot of that. So when I get off a call, sometimes I'll have a little bit, put a little bit of jazz on in the background. So movement is good. You know, there's lots of things that people do to help to process some of this stuff that goes on. But it's important, I think, that we find strategies to do that. And I wish you the opportunity to practice that if you haven't in this month, and to continue to look after yourself in the forthcoming months and years. That is me.
Wow, amazing. Joy, thank you so much for just that valuable insight. I was just scribbling down some things as you were talking, because it just struck me just how much of what you said I saw in myself. And I just knew exactly what you were talking about and exactly what you meant. And I know I'm not isolated in that. And it just gave an amazing sense of like, wow, you know, you articulated it so beautifully. And if I could just maybe get your thoughts really on a couple of things. So I don't know, I mean, we're the NHS and we're a world leading organization. And so there's been a lot of discussion around recently Henrietta Lacks. I don't know if you've heard of her. So she was a Black woman that had ovarian cancer, I think in America. And essentially her cells, although it eventually killed her, her cells and the way her cells responded to the ovarian cancer were sort of transformative, in that her cells just didn't die. And so what actually happened is that her cells were sold and used to create billions of dollars worth of additional lines of medicine, of experimentation. They're still used today. And they even named the cells after her, HeLa cells. So, you know, my degree is in biochemistry, and I can actually recall using these cells and not knowing anything about this woman, her contribution to medicine, from cancer to, I mean, these cells are used right the way across the board. And I was interested in your comments about the legacy on prejudice thinking, and how as Black and brown people, that whole thinking, you know, the iceberg image where a lot of things are now covert, and how it was just totally okay to take, use and license and profit out of her cells and make billions of dollars worth of medicines and things around the world still being used today. And that was just totally okay without consent. But her family anyway did find out about it, and there's a massive lawsuit going on now to get that recognition. And I just sort of think it's so hard. It's so hard and it's so sad. And you know, where you were talking about being holy, and I think that is really critical as well, because I think, especially in leading the network, completely notwithstanding my own personal experience and my own journey, but as you know, co-chairing the network and taking on all of the emotions of that, I think that's really important for self-care. What would you say to that?
Well, that's big. I mean, I hadn't heard of this individual, but I think there are lots of examples where I've got a colleague who's doing a bit of matriculation at the moment on how much value, I can't remember which country is doing it, just one country, how much has been appropriated by Western society that belonged to that country.
Yeah.
And it's trillions.
Yeah.
You know, because actually if wealth and opportunity had been left, if it hadn't, you know, if we hadn't gone through a colonization process, then all of the goodies that were ever there would still be there, wouldn't they?
Yes.
So I mean, I think that one of the things that I know that people talk a lot about the importance of history, but it isn't just about telling the truth, but it's also about, in a way, having an opportunity to think about yourself and your histories and your legacies, your ancestry, in much more of a kind of positive light.
Yes.
You know, that there was a time before colonialism, that there was a time before slavery, that actually, you know, that our history didn't start like that. Yeah.
Yes.
And I think that you know, that whole process of, the further you go back, the more you see the exploitation, the more you see the appropriation of resources, of labor, of things. It's a very challenging issue, because I suspect what tends to happen is that in modern day society, people kind of go, oh, that was such a long time ago. But I mean, the thing about racism and now is that it's current. You know, I really wish it would have been a long time ago. You know, I really wish it was in the past. But the fact that it isn't in the past is also because we don't face up to the past.
Yes.
And until we can't, you know, don't face up to the past, it's hard then to face up to the present.
Exactly. And what you've just said, I felt very much a real and present thing for me when, as part of the Black History Month celebrations, we were really lucky to be funded by the ACT charity to take 50 members of staff to see The Woman King. And I don't know if you've recently seen
I've not
it.
seen it. I've seen it advertised. Is it
good?
good?
My God, you've got to see it. It's phenomenal. Judith is shaking her head. So Judith was with us, and it's phenomenal. But what struck me was just the way that the power and what Black and brown people present in society and its portrayal. So, you know, like if it was Wonder Woman or Amazons, they're always portrayed as white women, beautiful, you know, it's okay for them to be powerful and strong and aggressive and whatever. And it's like, oh, wow. But, you know, Viola Davis in her interview, in talking about the movie, these people were like, well, how do you think people are going to respond to seeing Black women with machetes and swords? And, you know, like, well, hang on, why is this a problem? You know, so it's just this constant triage and battle. But it makes me feel actually an incredible sense of pride in my heritage. And I understand, you know, when you were also talking about, you know, how we go through the 3Ds. And even in the role that I am in as chair of the network, even in the work that I do, I still find myself at times thinking, did that really happen? And like, how do I deal with this? So the self-care themes and elements that you were talking about are really important. And I'm really grateful actually that Addenbrooke's as a trust is on a journey. And I think it's amazing that we've acknowledged that we have work to do and that we're willing to sort of work with organisations like yourself, Joy. And I would very much like to invite you back to do a piece within the network, actually, explicitly within the Reach network, because I think that, you know, there's so much value in that, particularly, you know, if I could ask you a question, you spoke about the responsibility to fix this problem isn't ours. And then within that, I suppose my question to you, if I could ask you one, would be, what role do you see the networks playing, I think, in terms of supporting staff and then in supporting the organisation as well, to just move forward and make positive strides in this journey? What your
That's a
thoughts
really
on
good,
this?
really good question. So I'm kind of getting old now. I think I've been
Please.
involved in a number. So my first experience of a Black Workers Network was when I was 19, and I went along to the network, and then for every organisation I've worked in, I've sort of joined. Whether it was the Black Workers Network or sometimes it was called other fancy names. And I think one of the challenges that I will be really honest and clear about, which you picked up in Tracy, is that it is not our role to fix racism. And I think any organisation that places a responsibility to fix racism on their staff network, I think is totally misguided. It's totally in the wrong place. I think the organisation can use the networks, and I say only if people want to talk about where discrimination is showing up. So as a woman, where is it showing up? In terms of what we're talking about today, in terms of racism, where is it showing up? But after a while, that gets old. I feel like we are forced in a position as Black and brown people where we're constantly talking about our experiences, and it's re-traumatizing. How many times am I going to tell you that I experienced racism for you to understand that I experienced racism?
Yeah.
How many case studies I'm going to bring? How many times am I going to break down the information? How many times do I have to divide it and to present it and to represent it? This has been going on for years. So I really honestly believe the work needs to be with the organisation, it needs to be with leadership, it needs to be with white presenting people. And I think we have a role to play together. But I think for too long now, it's been a little bit of a kind of, well, we've got a group, we've got a staff network, that's ticking the box.
Yeah.
It doesn't say you're doing anything about racism. Even if you pay your leaders, even if you give those people time to run the groups, which I think you should be doing anyway, I don't think those are the thing. The thing in my view is, what is the organization doing to safeguard its staff, to promote a healthy work environment? And a lot of that is because lots of people who are white and white presenting either don't know what they're doing or are not made accountable for what they're doing.
Yeah.
And I think unless organizations lean this way, we'll be, we'll be at res 50. Oh, it's the 50th time we've done the res. Look, we've not been there. What we're doing is we're just counting, going up and down and up and down. We're not really changing it. I would love, some of the measures to be, white people feel they can talk about race without feeling scared. They feel they can talk to me without feeling scared. They feel they can have a challenging conversation with somebody else about racism in the same way that they would do around child safeguarding or around gender. These are measures that mean the organization is getting it, people are getting it. So we're measuring the wrong thing, in my view. Not that we shouldn't be measuring discrimination, but it can't be the only thing we measure to make the organization healthy.
Yeah, that's really, really interesting, actually. And I think for me as well, accountability is quite a key thing. And again, we are on a journey here at Addenbrooke's, but we've got some wonderful VSM leaders that are very engaged with this discussion. Roland Sinker, the chief exec, engages with the leadership team of the Reach Network. David Werrett, who's on the call as well, very supportive, but we have got a long way to go. That said, there is a comment here in the chat that David has written. So he says, wow, indeed, I'm struck by a number of things, Joy, including helping establish a national framework for handling the irrational, wretched and endemic racism, and not unrelated, constructively using anger when raw anger has achieved so much, but brings jeopardy, I think he means there. So your thoughts around that, Joy? Rational framework. Thank you.
Well, David and I could have been thinking the same thing. I think we do need we're I love the NHS, like many people. When I travel abroad, I'm blown over by what we have here and the dedication and support of many staff. I think we're not necessarily doing this job as well as we could be doing it. So we do need another type of framework. We think there's going to be a quick fix to a wicked issue.
Yeah.
And this is a wicked issue. I know why we reach for the quick fix. It's like me. I kind of do this, like, I'm going to have a 4-minute video on how to get fit. And I think that the 4-minute video is going to do what I need to do, and it doesn't do what I need to do. At some point, we need to go deeper. We need to work harder, but we need to measure different things. So if that's what you mean by a rational framework, David, I totally agree with you. I think that we chase things. We kind of go, we'll do a bit of this, we'll do a bit of that. That trust is doing this and this and this, and they've got this, and they've got this accountability, and we've got, and we know if we really deeply think about ourselves as leaders in this journey, we know that what needs to change is what's not necessarily being touched by all of this stuff that we have around us.
Yeah.
And I think it is a journey, and we do need to start to change. And actually, so much can happen if leaders get themselves underneath it, if we encourage people to start to do this journey and to have those conversations. So I'm really pleased to hear you say that your leadership are engaged, not because, for me, it's not about what you have to do or what's required. It's recognizing the humanity of this situation, recognizing that what we're talking about here is human suffering. And I don't know why we don't recognize that. And I think it's because the figures and the data disguise the fact that there are real people with real talents and real abilities that every day are kind of made less because of the world we live in. And when I think about it like that, I think, well, why wouldn't you want to get on board? You joined the NHS because you wanted to contribute something. And a lot of the time, it's the systemic that stops us from doing it. It's the system that says, oh, I'm a white person, this isn't anything to do with me, or somebody's going to take, or that EDS2 is going to work, or it's not until we roll our sleeves up that we can eradicate this. And I have to believe we can eradicate it, because I don't want my grandchildren and my grandchildren to be counted as a statistic forever and ever and ever and ever. You know, we've got to be able to, we set this stuff up, we set race in motion, we can do something about it, and I really believe that.
So do you think we should be brave then as an organization, or do you think there is a place for Addenbrooke's to be brave, to roll our sleeves up and say, okay, we've got the res and we've got all of this stuff and we know we have to participate, but actually for us as an organization, this is what we believe, this is what we're going to do, and we can set our own metrics and our own standards and our own accountabilities and just go for it?
Absolutely. It takes courage. It takes going off piece. You know, and I think that if we know that what we're doing, and I'm not at all wanting to derail the good intentions of all of the things that we put in place, but there's something for us to take up this mantle now, really. And I think that organizations have become too complacent, and a lot of the stuff, all of these mechanisms and processes, they keep us busy, but they don't do the work. And I think there's something for organizations to recognize what's keeping us busy and compliant, and what's the stuff that we really need to do to make the difference. And they're very rarely the same things.
And that's what I'm getting at, actually, and that's what I think, because I mean the res are very useful metrics. Obviously it's an amazing infrastructure that we needed, but for me some of the practical elements of, like you say, joining those two bits together of measuring the work and actually doing the work are a bit disconnected. So I think there's definitely a piece around that. Joy, I'm very aware that we're running out of time. And if
I'm amazed that we've used the time, Tracy. I've loved it.
I know, me too. I could just keep going all day with you, honestly, and we will have another session. But if I could just, so if we've got a member of staff, this is practically then wellness for people on the ground. If we've got a member of staff, they're struggling, they're experiencing racism, and you could give 3 sort of pointers as to things that they should be doing in terms of wellness or next steps to support them through this journey, what would you say?
I would say find a place to talk to someone. Don't hide it, feel, because the trauma of this, holding it all in yourself is a lot. So I would connect either with your network, with a colleague, with a friend. You know, there's something about talking about this. I think if it's safe to do so, I would raise it. If it happens in an organizational setting, raise it. Sometimes it's not safe, and by that I mean it doesn't go anywhere, and then it all comes back onto you again. So don't sit with this. It's really important that we raise it. And the third thing I think is to find other places where you can compensate. So, you know, what can you do that's going to give you joy, that's going to nourish you? Because sometimes when you're under the cosh, it can be really hard to see something wider. So, you know, try and find other outlets that are going to help you to feel more human and more connected to yourself and your beauty and your individuality, all of the things that make you you.
Wonderful. Joy, an absolute delight and pleasure to have you with us. You've got to come back. I'll definitely be reaching out to you. I'm thinking about doing something for the staff quarterly meeting, and I think I already mentioned that to you in March, to have you come in and do something face-to-face with us. We would absolutely love that. Judith said in the chat just how much she enjoyed it, and I know that to all of the staff that are going to watch this on catch up, I'm sure we'll be inundated with, you know, comments, and people will get a lot of value out of what you said. Joy, thank you so much.
Thank you for inviting me, Tracy. And
I'm just honoured to have presented with you today, to have hosted you, and I really look forward to working with you again at some point in the future. Thank you so much for your time today.
No problem. Thank you for giving me the opportunity, and thanks for the comms. Really good setup.
Awesome. Thank you. Thank you, Judith, for hosting. Thank
All
you.
right then.
David
Thank
sends
you.
best
Thanks,
wishes as
David.
well.
Yes.
Thank you.